The mud-splattered beggar, with the torn coat and haunted eyes, reached out his trembling hand, and Clara, the poorest cleaner in all of London, did something that made every passer-by stop and stare. She gave him her last coin, her only shawl, and then, without a moment's hesitation, she knelt in the filthy gutter and took his face in her hands, whispering that he mattered, that he was not invisible, that she saw him, and in that single moment, the Duke of Ashworth, the most powerful, wealthiest, and most emotionally frozen man in all of England, felt something crack open inside his chest that he thought had died 10 years ago. The rain fell in relentless sheets over the grimy streets of Cheapside, turning the cobblestones into rivers of mud and refuse. It was the kind of London weather that drove respectable people indoors, that sent carriages racing past with curtains drawn tight, that made the wealthy clutch their purses closer and hurry their steps. But Clara Bennet had no carriage, no purse to clutch, and no home to run to. She had only her worn cotton dress, her calloused hands, and the heavy bucket of soapy water that she carried from door to door, scrubbing the stoops of merchants who barely noticed her existence. She was 23 years old, though the hardships of her life had etched lines around her eyes that made her look older. Her mother had died when Clara was 12, leaving her in the care of a cruel aunt who had worked her like a mule and then thrown her out at 16 with nothing but the clothes on her back. For 7 years, Clara had survived by doing the work that no one else wanted: cleaning, scrubbing, carrying, fetching. She lived in a single rented room above a butcher's shop, where the smell of old meat seeped through the floorboards, and the rats grew bold enough to nibble at her toes while she slept. Yet despite everything, Clara Bennet had never lost her ability to see the humanity in others. It was, perhaps, her greatest weakness, and on this particular wet Thursday afternoon, it was about to change her life forever. She had just finished scrubbing the step of a haberdashery when she heard the commotion. A group of well-dressed gentlemen had gathered near the corner, their laughter cruel and sharp as broken glass. They were kicking at something on the ground, someone on the ground, and Clara's heart lurched with a familiar, sickening sympathy. "Look at him," one of the gentlemen sneered, his voice carrying over the rain. "A rat in human clothing. Probably stole his coat from a real man." "Worthless beggar," another agreed. "Should be transported, or hanged. Cleanse the streets of such filth." Clara's hands tightened on her bucket. She knew she should walk away. She knew the dangers of interfering with gentlemen, even cruel ones. She was nothing, a cleaner, a nobody. If she drew attention to herself, she could lose her work, her room, her fragile hold on survival. But then she saw the man on the ground. He was trying to push himself up, but one of the gentlemen put a boot on his back and shoved him back into the mud. The beggar's coat was torn and filthy, his hair matted with rain and grime, his face half hidden beneath a scraggly beard. But his eyes, Clara caught a glimpse of his eyes as he turned his head, and what she saw there broke something inside her. Those eyes were not the eyes of a drunkard or a criminal. They were eyes of profound, unbearable grief, eyes that had seen terrible things, eyes that had lost hope so long ago that they had forgotten what hope even felt like. Without thinking, Clara dropped her bucket. The soapy water splashed across the cobblestones, and she walked straight toward the group of gentlemen, her heart pounding, but her steps steady. "Excuse me," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Please, Leave him be." The gentleman turned to stare at her. They were young, perhaps in their 20s, with the ruddy complexions and entitled bearing of wealthy sons, who had never known a day of real work in their lives. The one who had been kicking the beggar, a tall man with cruel blue eyes, looked at Clara as if she were a piece of particularly offensive garbage. "Leave him be?" the man repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "And who are you to make such a request? The queen of the gutters?" Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not back down. "I'm no one," she admitted. "Just a cleaner. But this man has done nothing to you. He's hurt. Can't you see he's hurt?" The gentleman laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "He's a beggar, a parasite. He's nothing. And you're nothing too. Now run along before I decide to have you arrested for vagrancy." Clara's hands were shaking, but she stepped forward anyway, positioning herself between the gentleman and the fallen man. "If you're going to hurt someone, you'll have to hurt me first. And I promise you, I'll scream so loud that every merchant on this street will come running to see what the gentlemen are doing to a poor woman in the rain." For a moment, the gentleman's eyes flickered with uncertainty. He looked around at the shop windows, where curtains were twitching, and he seemed to realize that Clara's threat had teeth. A scandal was the last thing a young man of his station wanted. "Fine," he spat, stepping back. "Keep your beggar. He's not worth the mud on my boots anyway." And with that, he and his companions sauntered off, laughing as if the entire encounter had been nothing more than amusement. Clara let out a shaky breath and turned to the man on the ground. He had managed to push himself into a sitting position, his back against the wet wall of a building. His clothes were soaked through, and there was a cut on his forehead that was bleeding freely, mixing with the rain on his face. "Are you all right?" Clara asked, kneeling beside him, despite the filth that soaked through her thin dress. "Can you walk? Is anything broken?" The man looked up at her, and Clara felt her breath catch. His eyes were extraordinary, a deep, piercing gray that seemed to look straight through her, as if he could see every secret she had ever kept. But they were also hollow, empty, as if the man behind them had retreated so far into himself that he was barely present. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough and cracked from disuse. "Why did you help me? No one helps me. No one sees me." Clara didn't have a good answer. She could have given him a dozen practical reasons. The right thing to do, the Christian thing to do, the simple kindness of treating another human being with dignity. But the truth was, she had seen something in his eyes that had reminded her of herself. That same invisible feeling, that same desperate loneliness. "Because everyone deserves to be seen," she said softly. "And you looked like you needed someone to see you." The man stared at her for a long moment. Then, to Clara's shock, a single tear cut through the grime on his cheek. He quickly looked away, but she had seen it. "Here," she said, pulling off her worn wool shawl, her only one, the one she had saved for months to buy, and draping it around his shoulders. "You must be freezing." "Don't," he said, trying to push the shawl away. "You need this. You're soaked through yourself." "I'll be fine," Clara said firmly. "I'm used to being wet and cold. You don't look like you're used to any of this. Your hands." She glanced down at his fingers, which were long and elegant despite the dirt. "Those aren't the hands of a lifelong beggar." The man stiffened, and something flickered in his eyes. Fear? Wariness? I've been on the streets for some time now. A person changes. Clara didn't press. She had learned long ago that people had their secrets, and that pushing for answers often led to nothing but pain. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her last coin, a small copper penny that she had been saving for bread. "Take this," she said, pressing it into his palm. "It's not much, but it'll buy you a hot meal. There's a woman who sells soup near St. Paul's. Tell her Clara sent you. She'll give you a bowl, even if you're short." The man looked down at the coin in his hand, then back up at Clara. His expression was unreadable, but something in his gray eyes had shifted. The hollowness was still there, but beneath it, there was a spark of something else. Something that looked almost like wonder. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara. Clara Bennett. And you?" The man hesitated. For a long moment, he seemed to be wrestling with something internal, some decision that Clara could not see. Then he said, "William." "My name is William." Clara smiled. "It's a pleasure to meet you, William. Now please, go get that soup, and try to stay dry. The rain won't let up for hours." She stood up, her knees aching from kneeling on the hard stone, and gathered her empty bucket. She would have to refill it, she realized, and she had lost the soap she had been using. Another expense she could not afford. But as she walked away, she did not regret a single moment of what she had done. The man called William watched her go, his fingers curled around the copper penny she had given him. He watched until she disappeared around the corner, and even then, he sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been. Clara Bennett had no idea that the man she had just helped was not a beggar at all. William, as he had called himself, was in fact Alexander William Blackwood, the 8th Duke of Ashworth. He was 34 years old, the owner of estates across England and Scotland, a man whose fortune was so vast that even the crown occasionally turned to him for loans. He had been raised to be cold, controlled, and utterly invulnerable, the perfect duke, the embodiment of aristocratic power. But 10 years ago, everything had changed. Alexander had married young, at 24, to Lady Eleanor Ashford, the daughter of an earl. It was an arranged match, of course, the union of two powerful families, but to Alexander's surprise, he had grown to love his wife. Eleanor was beautiful, graceful, and kind, and she had seemed to genuinely care for him in return. For 3 years, they had been happy. Alexander had allowed himself to believe that he could have everything: duty, love, and a future filled with children and laughter. Then Eleanor had died. It had been a fever, sudden and cruel, that had taken her in a matter of days. Alexander had held her hand as she slipped away, and something inside him had died with her. He had retreated from the world, burying himself in his duties, managing his estates from a distance, refusing to attend social functions or even see his closest friends. He had become a ghost, a shadow of the man he had once been. His family had grown concerned. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, had tried everything to draw him out of his grief. Invitations, threats, even bringing eligible young women to the house unannounced. Nothing had worked. Alexander had simply retreated further, until he was barely seen by anyone at all. And then, 6 months ago, his mother had made the terrible mistake of announcing that she would not rest until he married again. She had been arranging matches behind his back, plotting and scheming, and Alexander had felt something snap inside him. He had fled, not to one of his estates, not to a gentleman's club, but to the streets. He had disguised himself as a beggar, his fine clothes replaced with rags, his carefully groomed appearance replaced with dirt and grime. He had wanted to disappear completely, to become a person so insignificant that no one would ever think to look for him. He had wanted to understand what it felt like to be invisible, to have nothing, to be nothing. It had been a reckless, foolish thing to do. He knew that now. But at the time, it had seemed like the only escape. For 2 weeks, he had wandered the streets of London, sleeping in alleys and eating whatever scraps he could find. The experience had been humiliating and eye-opening in equal measure. He had learned what it was truly like to be at the mercy of strangers, to be ignored and reviled, and occasionally beaten for no reason at all. He had seen the worst of humanity, and then, just when he had begun to despair entirely, he had met Clara Bennet, the cleaner, the woman who had given him her last coin and her only shawl, who had knelt in the mud and called him worthy of being seen. Alexander had not laughed, not truly laughed, in 10 years. He had not smiled, not genuinely smiled, since Eleanor's death. But when Clara had looked at him with those warm, intelligent eyes and spoken to him as if he were a person rather than a piece of garbage, he had felt something shift, something he had thought was dead forever. That night, he slept in a shelter that Clara had directed him to, using her penny to buy a bowl of soup. He sat in the corner, wrapped in her shawl, and he thought about her. He thought about the way she had stood up to those cruel gentlemen without a moment's hesitation. He thought about the strength in her voice, the kindness in her hands, the way she had looked at him as if he mattered. And he realized that he had to see her again. But Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ashworth, could not simply approach a poor cleaner as himself. If he revealed his identity, she would treat him differently. She would be deferential, intimidated, perhaps even fearful. He would never know if the connection he had felt was real, or if it was simply the result of her kind nature. No, he would approach her as William. He would continue the disguise for a little while longer. He wanted to know the real Clara Bennet, the woman who would give her last coin to a stranger in the rain. He wanted to understand why she had made him feel something again. The next morning, Clara was hard at work scrubbing the front steps of a tea house when she heard a hesitant voice behind her. "Miss Bennet?" She turned, and there he was, William, the beggar from the previous day. He had washed some of the grime from his face, and he was wearing her shawl around his shoulders. He looked slightly better, though still gaunt and exhausted. "William?" Clara said, a smile spreading across her face despite herself. "You came! Did you find the soup cellar?" Was the soup warm? It was, William said, and Clara noticed that his voice was stronger today, less hoarse. I wanted to thank you, properly. No one has ever been so kind to me." "It was nothing," Clara said, waving her hand dismissively. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," William said firmly. "They wouldn't. I've been on the streets long enough to know that most people would have walked right past me. You didn't. And I want to repay you somehow, if you'll let me." Clara laughed. "Repay me? You just said you've been on the streets. What could you possibly repay me with?" William's expression grew thoughtful. "I could help you. With your work. I may look like a beggar, but I'm stronger than I appear. I can carry things. Scrub things. Fetch things. Whatever you need. Clara stared at him, genuinely surprised. You want to work? For me? Is that so strange? William asked, a hint of something that might have been amusement flickering in his gray eyes. I need to earn my keep. And you need help, don't you? The way you were carrying that bucket yesterday. I saw how heavy it was. You could use an extra pair of hands. Clara was silent for a moment, considering. It was true that her work was exhausting, and she often struggled to complete all her jobs in a single day. An assistant would be invaluable. But could she trust a stranger? Especially a stranger who had been living on the streets. I can't pay you, she said finally. I barely make enough for myself. I don't want payment, William said quickly. Just food. A place to sleep sometimes, if you have room. I promise I won't be a burden. Clara thought about her tiny room above the butcher's shop, with its single cot and its leaky roof. She had nothing to offer anyone. But then she looked at William's face, and she saw the desperation there, the fear that she would turn him away, that he would be alone again. All right, she said softly. All right, come with me. You can help me finish this step, and then I'll show you where I work. But William, she held up a finger, if you try to steal from me or hurt me, I won't hesitate to call the constable. Do you understand? William put his hand over his heart. You have my word. I would never hurt you, Clara Bennett. I would sooner cut off my own hand. Clara rolled her eyes. That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? Now come on, pick up that brush and start scrubbing. And try to keep up. I don't have all day. She turned back to her work, and she did not see the smile that curved across William's face. It was a small smile, a tentative one, but it was the first genuine smile Alexander William Blackwood had worn in 10 years. The next few weeks were the strangest of Alexander's life. He woke every morning in the corner of Clara's tiny room. She had insisted he take the cot, and she had slept on the floor, a kindness that had nearly undone him. And he spent his days helping her clean the stoops and steps of London's merchants and shopkeepers. It was beneath his dignity. It was completely insane. The Duke of Ashworth, scrubbing cobblestones alongside a poor cleaner, wearing rags and eating bread and cheese that she had bought with her meager earnings. But Alexander had never been happier. There was something intoxicating about the simplicity of it all. No titles, no expectations, no marriage-minded mothers and their grasping daughters. Just honest work and honest conversation. Clara talked to him as if he were her equal, because she thought he was. She shared her thoughts and feelings without reservation, without the careful calculation that characterized every interaction in his usual world. And Alexander found himself genuinely liking her. She was sharp-witted and funny, quick to laugh and slow to anger. She could be scathing when someone was cruel, but she was also deeply compassionate, always the first to offer help to someone in need. She worked harder than anyone he had ever known, and she never complained about her circumstances, even when they were dire. I've had worse, she told him one afternoon, when they were taking a break on the steps of a church. When I was 16, my aunt threw me out with nothing. I spent 3 weeks sleeping in doorways before I found work. At least now I have a roof over my head. I'm sorry you went through that, Alexander said softly. Your aunt sounds like a terrible woman. She was, Clara agreed. But I don't hold grudges. It takes too much energy, and I've never had energy to waste. She smiled up at him, and Alexander felt his heart skip a beat. Besides, if she hadn't thrown me out, I would never have found my own path. I would probably be married to a butcher's son by now, with 6 children and a perpetual smell of sausages. Alexander laughed. It was a real laugh, deep and warm, and it startled them both. "Good heavens," Clara said, her eyes wide. "Did you just laugh? I thought you were incapable of anything other than brooding." Alexander's smile faded slightly. "I haven't had much reason to laugh these past years." "Then I'll have to give you more reasons," Clara said lightly, and she hopped to her feet and offered him her hand. "Come on. We have 3 more stoops to scrub before dark, and if we finish early, I might even let you have an extra piece of bread." Alexander took her hand and let her pull him up. His fingers lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. He did not realize it yet, but he was falling in love. As the days passed, Alexander found it increasingly difficult to maintain his disguise. He was a duke, trained from birth to control his emotions, but Clara Bennett made him feel things he had not felt in a decade: joy, hope, a desperate longing for something he had thought was lost forever. He wanted to tell her who he really was. He knew he should. The deception was growing heavier with every passing day, and he hated the thought that he was lying to her, this woman who had shown him nothing but kindness. But he was also terrified. What if she hated him when she learned the truth? What if she saw his deception as a betrayal, a cruel joke? What if she refused to see him ever again? Alexander had spent 10 years grieving his wife, and in that time he had built walls around his heart so high that he thought no one could ever breach them. Clara had climbed those walls without even realizing it. She had done it by being herself, by being kind and strong and unapologetically real. And now, the thought of losing her was unbearable. So he said nothing. He told himself he would find the right moment, the perfect time to confess everything. But that moment never seemed to arrive, and the deception continued. The tension in Alexander's life was about to become much more complicated. It was a cold Tuesday afternoon when Clara and Alexander were finishing up at a merchant's shop on King Street. They were both tired, covered in grime, and eagerly anticipating the bowl of soup that Clara had promised they would share for dinner. And then, a carriage pulled up in front of them. It was a beautiful carriage, gleaming black with silver trim, drawn by 4 matched grays. The crest on the door was unmistakable, the Blackwood family crest, a lion rampant on a field of azure. Alexander's blood ran cold. "Good heavens," Clara breathed, her eyes wide. "Who do you suppose that belongs to? Someone important, surely." "Very important," Alexander said, his voice strained. "We should go, now." But it was too late. The carriage door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was elegant and beautiful, with dark hair and sharp green eyes. She was dressed in the height of fashion, her gown a deep emerald silk that must have cost more than Clara would earn in a lifetime. "Alexander," the woman said, her voice carrying across the street. "There you are. I've been searching for you for weeks." Clara stared at Alexander, her expression confused. "Alexander, I thought your name was William." Alexander felt his heart sink into his boots. There was no way out of this, no way to explain. The woman was none other than Lady Arabella Kensington, his mother's goddaughter, and the woman his mother had been trying to force him to marry for the past 3 years. "Arabella," Alexander said, his voice flat. "What are you doing here?" "I've come to bring you home, of course," Lady Arabella said, her eyes flickering to Clara with barely concealed contempt. "Your mother is beside herself with worry. Do you have any idea what you've put her through? Gallivanting around London in rags, associating with—" She paused, her lip curling slightly. "With cleaning women." Clara's face went pale. She looked from Lady Arabella to Alexander, and her expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror. "Your name isn't William," she said slowly. "Is it? You're not a beggar at all." Alexander opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. How could he explain? How could he make her understand? "I can explain," he finally managed. "Clara, please, Explain what?" Clara's voice was rising now, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That you lied to me? That you've been pretending to be something you're not, all this time?" "I never meant to hurt you," Alexander said desperately. I was hiding from my life, my family, and then I met you, and I didn't know how to tell you the truth. I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Clara demanded. "Afraid that I would treat you differently? That I would care about you for who you really are?" "No," Alexander said, the word coming out like a confession. "Afraid that you would stop looking at me the way you do, like I matter, like I'm something more than a title and a fortune." Clara stared at him, and Alexander saw the war in her eyes. Anger, hurt, confusion, and beneath it all, something that looked almost like understanding. But before she could respond, Lady Arabella stepped forward and laid a possessive hand on Alexander's arm. "Come, Your Grace," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is beneath you. Let the girl go. She was nothing more than a charity case anyway. You don't owe her anything." Alexander turned to look at her, and for the first time in 10 years, he felt pure, unadulterated rage. "She is not a charity case," he said, his voice cold as ice. "She is the most remarkable woman I have ever met. And you—" he pulled his arm free from her grip. "You have no right to speak of her that way." Lady Arabella's face flushed with anger. "You cannot be serious. Your mother would never allow it. You are a duke, Alexander. You cannot marry a cleaning woman." "I didn't say I was going to marry her," Alexander said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were a lie. Of course he wanted to marry her. He had never wanted anything more in his life. But Clara was already backing away, her face pale and drawn. "I think I should go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is it's too much. You should have told me, Alexander. Or William. Or whoever you really are." "Clara, wait." Alexander reached for her, but she stepped back, out of his reach. "No," she said firmly. "I need some time, to think." She looked at him, and the hurt in her eyes was like a knife to his heart. "I thought I knew you. I trusted you. And all this time, you were lying to me." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of the busy London street. Alexander stood there, frozen, watching her go. "Come, Alexander," Lady Arabella said, tugging at his arm. "Let's go home. Your mother will know how to handle this." "No," Alexander said, pulling away from her again. "You go home. Tell my mother I'll be there when I'm ready. But first—" He looked around the street, desperately searching for Clara. "First, I have to fix this." "You can't fix it," Lady Arabella said coldly. "She's a nobody. She's nothing. In a few days, she'll realize that and move on." "She is not a nobody," Alexander said, his voice hard as steel. "She's the only person in the world who has ever seen me for who I truly am. And I will not let her go. Not for you. Not for my mother. Not for anyone." He started walking in the direction Clara had gone, leaving Lady Arabella standing alone in the street, her face twisted with fury and wounded pride. Clara walked without knowing where she was going. She walked past the familiar landmarks of her daily life. The tea house, where she sometimes bought a cup of tea on cold mornings. The church, where she occasionally sat in the back pew when she needed somewhere quiet to think. The baker's shop, where she purchased the bread that had kept her alive for the past 7 years. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. She had been a fool, a complete, utter, foolish fool. She had believed his lies, had trusted him, had let herself imagine a future that could never exist. She had even allowed herself to fall in love with him. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? She had fallen in love with William, with his gentle eyes and his quiet strength, with the way he had helped her without complaint, the way he had made her laugh, the way he had looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. But he wasn't William. He was Alexander, Duke of Ashworth, a man so far above her that they existed in entirely different worlds. And he had lied. She came to a stop in front of the butcher's shop where she lived. The smell of old meat was strong tonight, mingling with the scent of the rain that had begun to fall once again. Clara stood there, letting the raindrops soak through her dress, and tried to decide what to do next. Go upstairs, pack her things, find a new place to live, find a new job, start over. Again. She had done it before. She could do it again. But as she stood there, a part of her rebelled against the idea. She had done nothing wrong. She had been kind and honest and true. She had given a stranger her last coin, her only shawl, her trust. And all of that was still true, regardless of who that stranger had turned out to be. She had just reached this conclusion when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Clara, please, let me explain." She turned. Alexander was standing in the rain, his expensive clothes soaked through, his rags replaced by the fine coat and trousers that Lady Arabella must have brought him. He looked like a completely different person, elegant, powerful, utterly aristocratic. But his eyes were the same, those deep gray eyes, full of emotion that he was trying desperately to suppress. "Why should I listen?" Clara asked, her voice wavering. "You lied to me, Alexander. Every moment we spent together, you were pretending to be someone else." "I know," he said, taking a step closer, "and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. But you have to understand, I didn't set out to deceive you. When I met you, I was lost. I had been lost for 10 years. I had given up on ever feeling anything again. And then you." He shook his head, a raw and broken gesture. "You saw me, not the Duke, not the fortune, not the title. You saw me, and for the first time in a decade, I felt like a real person again." Clara's heart ached at his words, but she forced herself to stay firm. "That doesn't change the fact that you lied." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. And if you never want to see me again, I understand." But before you make that decision, there's something you need to know." "What?" Clara asked warily. "There's a reason I ran away," Alexander said, his voice heavy with emotion. "It wasn't just grief. It wasn't just my mother's scheming. It was—" He took a breath. "It was this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to Clara, and after a moment, she took it. She unfolded it and read. It was a letter from Lady Arabella to the Dowager Duchess, dated 3 weeks before Alexander had disappeared. In it, Lady Arabella laid out her plans to force Alexander into marriage by trapping him in a compromising situation. She had even mentioned using a woman, a poor, desperate creature, to help her scheme, someone who would be easily manipulated and easily discarded. Clara's hands shook as she read. She was going to use someone like me to trap you into marriage? "I believe so, yes," Alexander said grimly. "When I found this letter, I felt something break inside me. My own mother, plotting with Arabella to destroy my life. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't face it, so I ran." Clara looked up at him, and she saw the truth in his eyes. Every word he had said was sincere. He had been running from a terrible betrayal, trying to find a moment's peace in the chaos of his life. "Alexander," she whispered, "I didn't know. I didn't understand." "Of course you didn't," he said gently. "I didn't tell you. I was ashamed. I was afraid that if you knew the truth about my family, you would see me differently, and I couldn't bear that." Clara was silent for a moment, wrestling with the turmoil inside her. Then, very slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "Your mother," she said carefully, "and Lady Arabella. They're still scheming, aren't they? They won't just let this go." Alexander's expression darkened. "No, they won't. Arabella especially. She was humiliated today, and she doesn't forgive easily. She'll try to ruin you, Clara. She'll try to destroy everything you've built." "Let her try," Clara said, and there was steel in her voice. "I've survived worse than a jealous noblewoman, and if she does try something, well, at least I know what I'm facing now." Alexander stared at her, and then, to his own surprise, he laughed. It was a broken, disbelieving laugh, but it was genuine. "You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met," he said softly. "And I promise you, Clara Bennett, I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you, if you'll let me." Clara squeezed his hand. "I'll think about it," she said, allowing herself a small smile. "But first, you need to go home and deal with your mother, and Lady Arabella, and whatever else is waiting for you at that grand house of yours." "I don't want to go," Alexander admitted. "I want to stay here, with you." "You can't," Clara said firmly. "You're a duke, Alexander. You can't hide forever. And if we're going to—" she hesitated, unsure of how to finish the sentence. "If we're going to be together," he finished for her. "Yes, I know. But Clara—" He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I will come back for you. I swear it. And when I do, I will make sure that no one ever tries to come between us again." Clara felt her heart soar and plummet at the same time. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that everything would work out. But Lady Arabella's calculating eyes haunted her, and she knew that the battle was only just beginning. "Go," she said softly. "Go and sort out your life. I'll be here." waiting. She watched him walk away through the rain, and she wondered if she would ever see him again. Alexander returned to Ashworth House that night to find a war waiting for him. His mother, the Dowager Duchess, was pacing the drawing room like a caged animal, her face flushed with righteous fury. Lady Arabella was seated on a settee, her hands folded primly in her lap, but her green eyes burned with barely concealed hatred.
"Where have you been?"
his mother demanded as soon as he walked through the door. "Gallivanting around London in rags, associating with servants. Do you have any idea what this has done to our reputation?" "I don't care about our reputation," Alexander said coldly. "I care about being left in peace." "Peace?" his mother sputtered. "You call this peace? Disappearing for weeks without a word, only to be found in the company of some cleaning woman?" "Her name is Clara Bennet," Alexander said, his voice dangerously quiet, "and she is the finest woman I have ever met. She is kind, honest, and strong, qualities that seem to be in short supply in this room." Lady Arabella rose from the settee, her face a mask of wounded dignity. "Your Grace, I understand that you are upset, but you must see reason. A woman of that station, she would never fit into your world. She would embarrass you at every turn. She would be a liability." "She is not a liability," Alexander snapped. "She is a person with feelings, and she has done nothing to deserve your cruelty." Lady Arabella's eyes narrowed. "You're in love with her, aren't you? You actually believe you love that creature?" Alexander did not answer, but his silence was answer enough. "Then you leave me no choice," Lady Arabella said, and she produced a sheet of paper from her reticule. "I was going to wait until the time was right, but it seems I have no choice but to act now. Read this." Alexander took the paper. It was a letter, written in a hand he recognized, the elegant, practiced script of his mother's solicitor. "What is this?" he demanded, scanning the contents. "It's proof," Lady Arabella said sweetly. "Proof that your precious Clara Bennet was in on it all along. She and my maid, Emma, they conspired to trap you. Emma was the one who put the idea in my head, you see. She was working for Clara all along." Alexander stared at her, his mind reeling. "That's not possible. Clara would never—" "She would," Lady Arabella insisted. "She knew exactly who you were from the moment you met. She orchestrated the entire thing. The chance meeting, the sympathy, the kindness. It was all a plan to trap you into marriage. I have witnesses. I have letters. I have everything I need to destroy her." Alexander's hands were shaking. He looked at his mother, and he saw the truth in her eyes. She had been in on this all along. She had helped Arabella fabricate this scheme to destroy Clara and force Alexander into a marriage of convenience. "You cannot do this," Alexander said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You cannot destroy an innocent woman simply because she doesn't fit your plans." "Watch me," Lady Arabella said coldly. "Unless you agree to marry me, properly, with a proper announcement and a proper wedding, I will spread these letters everywhere. The newspapers, the gossip columns, the drawing rooms of every important family in England. Your precious Clara will be ruined. She'll never work again. She'll be lucky to find a roof over her head." Alexander felt a cold fury building inside him. He wanted to tear the letter to shreds. He wanted to scream. He wanted to throw Lady Arabella out of his house and never look at her again. But he couldn't, because if he did, Clara would suffer. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "You win. I will announce our engagement. But if you harm Clara in any way, if you so much as breathe a word against her, I will destroy you. I will make sure that every secret you've ever kept comes to light. Do you understand?" Lady Arabella's smile was triumphant. "Perfectly, Your Grace. I knew you would see reason." Alexander turned and walked out of the room. He could not bear to look at them for another moment. He had just agreed to marry a woman he despised, and all to protect the woman he loved. It was the worst moment of his life. Clara read the letter 3 times before she could fully comprehend what it said. Alexander had written to her, explaining everything: the forged letters, Lady Arabella's scheme, the blackmail. He had agreed to marry Lady Arabella to protect Clara from ruin. "And I know you will be angry with me," the letter read, "but please understand that I could not bear to see you suffer because of me. I would rather spend my life married to a woman I despise than to live with the knowledge that I caused your destruction. Forgive me, or don't, but know that I will always love you." Clara sank down onto her cot. The letter clutched against her chest. Her eyes were dry, but there was a gaping hole in her heart where joy used to live. He was going to marry Lady Arabella, the beautiful, cruel, scheming woman who had tried to destroy them both, and there was nothing Clara could do to stop it. She thought about going to see Alexander, but she knew that would only make things worse. She was a nobody, a poor cleaner with no family, no fortune, no connections. Against the might of the aristocracy, she was nothing. But as she sat there in the fading light, something stirred inside her, something that had been forged in years of hardship and struggle, the same courage that had allowed her to stand up to those cruel gentlemen in the street, the same fierce determination that had kept her alive through all the years of poverty and neglect. She couldn't fight Lady Arabella directly. She didn't have the money or the power, but there was someone else who might be able to help her, someone who hated Lady Arabella just as much as Clara did. Her maid, Emma. Clara had met Emma once, briefly, when the maid had delivered a message to Alexander's townhouse. She remembered the girl's face, young, scared, trapped in a situation she hadn't chosen, and she remembered the way Emma's eyes had flickered with something like recognition when she had seen Clara. What if Emma had been forced to lie? What if she had been coerced into helping Lady Arabella with her scheme? Clara rose from the cot, her heart pounding with a desperate plan. She would find Emma. She would convince her to tell the truth. And together, they would expose Lady Arabella for who she truly was. It was a long shot. It was probably foolish, but it was all Clara had, and she was determined to fight for the man she loved. The next day, Clara found Emma in the kitchens of Lady Arabella's townhouse. The maid was terrified when she saw Clara. She tried to run, but Clara caught her arm. "Please," Clara said, her voice soft but urgent. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help." Emma's eyes were wide with fear. "You don't understand. Lady Arabella, she'll kill me. She has evidence. She has everything." "Evidence of what?" Clara asked gently. "What did she make you do?" Emma's face crumpled. "She forced me. She said if I didn't help her, she would send me to the streets. She made me write those letters. She said it would ruin you, but I didn't. I didn't want to hurt anyone." Clara's heart ached. Emma was just a pawn, Like everyone else in Lady Arabella's schemes, she had been a victim all along. "Then tell the truth," Clara said. "Tell everyone what she did. Help me stop her." Emma shook her head violently. "I can't. She'll destroy me. You don't know what she's like." "I know exactly what she's like," Clara said firmly. "And I know that if we don't stop her, she'll only keep hurting people. Think about it, Emma. How many others will suffer because of her? How many more innocent people will she destroy?" Emma was silent, tears streaming down her face. Then, very slowly, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "I'll help you. But we have to be careful. Very, very careful." Meanwhile, Alexander was preparing for the engagement announcement that would destroy his life. Lady Arabella had been insufferable since his agreement. She had taken over the planning of the announcement, inviting every important family in London, ensuring that the event would be the social spectacle of the season. She had also made sure that the newspapers were informed, spreading the news far and wide. "I will make you a worthy duchess," she had told Alexander smugly. "You'll see. Within a year, you'll forget that pathetic little cleaner ever existed." Alexander had said nothing. He had simply turned and walked away, his heart cold with hatred. He was standing at the window of his study, staring out at the rain, when his butler announced a visitor. "A Miss Bennet," the butler said, his voice neutral. "She says it's urgent." Alexander's heart nearly stopped. He had never expected to see Clara again. He had assumed that his letter had been his final goodbye to her. "Show her in," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Clara entered the room, and Alexander felt his breath catch. She was soaked through, her dress dripping water onto the polished floorboards, but her eyes were ablaze with determination. "Clara," he breathed, "what are you doing here? You shouldn't." "I know," she said firmly, "but I had to come. I found Emma. She told me everything. Lady Arabella forced her to write those letters. There's no evidence. She was lying about everything." Alexander stared at her, disbelief warring with hope. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure," Clara said. "Emma is willing to testify. She'll tell everyone what Lady Arabella did. It's over, Alexander. She can't hurt us anymore." Alexander rushed to her, pulling her into his arms. "You did it," he said, his voice choking with emotion. "You saved us. You saved everything." "I didn't save anything," Clara said, hugging him back fiercely. "I just refused to give up. That's all." Alexander pulled back, looking down at her. "I love you," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to hear it. I love you. I loved you from the moment you knelt in that gutter and told me I mattered. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." Clara smiled up at him, her eyes glowing. "You already deserve me," she said softly. "You always did." And in that moment, all the pain and fear and heartbreak of the past weeks melted away. They had survived. They had found each other, and nothing would ever tear them apart again. The engagement announcement took place exactly as planned. Lady Arabella arrived at Ashworth House in a cloud of expensive perfume and anticipation. She was dressed in her finest gown, her smile smug and triumphant. She had no idea that her world was about to come crashing down around her. The ballroom was filled with the most important families in England. The Dowager Duchess presided over the proceedings, her face glowing with satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. And then the doors opened, and Emma walked in. The room went silent. Lady Arabella's face went pale. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "You were supposed to be gone. Get out of here now." But Emma did not leave. She walked to the center of the room, her hands shaking, her voice trembling. But she spoke clearly and loudly, her words echoing through the silent ballroom. "Lady Arabella Kensington is a liar," she said, "and I have proof." And then she told the truth. She told the assembled guests about the forged letters. She told them about Lady Arabella's scheme to trap the Duke of Ashworth into marriage. She told them about the threats and the coercion and the cruelty that Lady Arabella had shown to everyone who had the misfortune to cross her. The room erupted. Accusations flew. The Dowager Duchess looked as if she might faint. Lady Arabella's face was a mask of white-hot fury. "You little," she spat, lunging at Emma. But Alexander stepped forward, blocking her path. "I think you've caused enough damage," he said coldly. "The truth is out. And now, everyone here knows exactly what you are." Lady Arabella's eyes burned with hatred. "You will pay for this," she hissed. "Both of you. I'll make sure you regret this for the rest of your lives." But Alexander just shook his head. "I don't think so. You see, I've already spoken to my solicitors. The letters you forged, the threats you made, I have copies of everything. If you try to harm Clara or Emma, I will ruin you. Completely. Publicly. Is that clear?" Lady Arabella stared at him, her face contorted with rage. But she could see that she had lost. Her schemes had failed. There was nothing left for her to do but retreat. "Fine," she hissed. "You win, but you will regret this. Both of you." She turned and stalked out of the ballroom, her fine gown swishing behind her. No one stopped her. No one even looked at her. The Dowager Duchess was the next to face Alexander. She approached him with a mixture of anger and fear, clearly hoping to salvage the situation. "Alexander," she said, her voice shaking. "You cannot." "I can," Alexander said flatly, "and I will. You helped Arabella. You were willing to destroy an innocent woman to control me. That is not something I can forgive. You are no longer welcome in my life. Alexander, please." I said no. His voice was ice. "If you want to have any relationship with me, you will leave now and stay away until I decide otherwise." The Dowager Duchess looked around the room, hoping for allies, but found none. Everyone was staring at her. Everyone knew what she had done. She left. Slower than Lady Arabella, her pride shredded, her social standing in tatters. The ballroom had emptied of everyone, except Clara and Alexander. He turned to her, his eyes shining with love. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She laughed, a bright and joyful sound. "I've never been better. We won, Alexander. It's over. It's over," he agreed. "And now we have a future." Clara smiled up at him. "I don't care about titles or fortunes. All I want is you. All I've ever wanted is you." Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "You're wrong," she said. "You deserve everything, and I plan to give it to you." He laughed, a sound of pure joy. It was the second time in 10 years that he had laughed, and it was even more beautiful than the first. The Duke of Ashworth had found his happiness at last, and Clara Bennet, The poor cleaner who had helped a street beggar had found her place in the world, not as a duchess, but as a woman deeply, completely, and eternally loved.